The great chamber stretched across an artificial moon built 60,000 years ago by species that no longer existed. Crystals the size of mountains hung from the ceiling, each one glowing with soft light. The floor was made of something that looked like glass, but felt warm under the feet. 12 platforms floated in a circle around a central stage, and on each platform sat the representatives of the elder races. They were the rulers of the Orion Arm. They were the Galactic. Council. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka stood at the entrance and looked at this sight. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes. Behind her stood 2 other humans, both wearing environmental suits that were clearly outdated compared to the technology around them. The suits hummed and clicked, working hard just to keep their wearers alive in this alien atmosphere. A voice echoed through the chamber. It belonged to the Velthri Arbiter, a being made of liquid mercury that constantly shifted and flowed into different shapes. The species known as humanity has requested provisional membership in the Galactic Council. They have been assigned Seat 13. Yuki noticed how the other delegates reacted. Some made sounds that might have been laughter. Others simply looked away, already bored. She understood why. Seat 13 was the unlucky seat. It was the place given to species that were expected to fail. In 60,000 years, 47 species had sat in that seat. None of them remained in the council today. The platform for Seat 13 was smaller than the others. It floated at the lowest level, so that anyone sitting there had to look up at everyone else. This was intentional. Everything in this chamber was intentional. While Yuki walked forward with steady steps, her 2 companions followed. She could feel the eyes of ancient beings watching her, judging her, dismissing her. The Crethoni delegate was the most obvious about it. He was an insectoid giant, standing 3 meters tall, with a hard shell that gleamed like black armor. His mandibles clicked together in a rhythm that Yuki had learned meant amusement. To him, humans were a joke. The Velthri Arbiter continued speaking, listing the terms of humanity's provisional membership. Restricted travel within council space, no colonization beyond their home system, mandatory technology audits every 5 years, limited voting rights, limited trade rights, limited everything. These were not the terms given to valued members. These were the terms given to species the council wanted to control until they either proved useful or died out. When the Arbiter finished, Yuki stepped onto the small platform of Seat 13. It wobbled slightly under her weight. She looked up at the 12 elder races. These beings who had ruled the stars for longer than humanity had existed as a species. "We accept," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the chamber's acoustics carried it to every corner. Some of the delegates seemed surprised that she had not argued. The Jorith representative, a collective consciousness that appeared as a single pale humanoid figure, tilted its head with curiosity. It had expected resistance, negotiation, perhaps even anger. But Yuki had studied the council for 30 years. She knew every treaty in their archives. She knew every law, every precedent, every loophole. She knew that arguing now would accomplish nothing except making humanity look weak and desperate. More importantly, she knew something that the elder races had forgotten. The council was dying. Not from war, not from disease, not from any external threat. It was dying from stagnation. For 60,000 years, the same 12 species had held power. The same ideas had been repeated. The same careful balance had been maintained. Nothing new had happened in so long that the concept of change had become almost foreign to them. The Velthri had not discovered new science in 10,000 years. The Crethoni had not expanded their territory in 15,000. The Jorith had stopped evolving their collective consciousness 20,000 years ago. They were all frozen, locked in place, slowly fading without even realizing it. And now, humanity had arrived. A species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times. A species that had crawled out of nuclear fire and biological plagues and climate disasters. A species that could not seem to stop changing, growing, adapting. The elder races saw weakness in humanity's short lives and internal conflicts. Yuki saw something else entirely. After the ceremony ended, Yuki returned to the small quarters assigned to the human delegation. It was a single room with basic furniture, located in the oldest section of the station. The message was clear. Humans were not important enough for better accommodations. Her two companions, Dr. Samuel Reyes and Commander Lin Zhao, were waiting for her. Both looked tired. The journey to the council had taken 2 years in their cramped ship. They gave us the unlucky seat, Lin said. There was frustration in her voice. 13 species before us have held that position. All of them are gone now. 14, Samuel corrected quietly. There were 14. The council does not count the Ashkari, because they were absorbed as a client species rather than removed. Yuki nodded. She had studied the Ashkari case carefully. They were an aquatic species that had joined the council 2,000 years ago. When they faced a crisis, they were forced to accept protection from the Velthri. Now they were little more than servants, their culture and independence erased. We will not share their fate, Yuki said. We are not here to become powerful. We are not here to fight. We are here to do something the council has forgotten how to do, and what is that? Lin asked. YUKI looked out the small window at the stars. Somewhere out there, billions of humans were waiting to hear what would happen. They had sent their best diplomats, their most patient negotiators, their most careful planners. They had prepared for decades. We are here to make friends, Yuki said. Lin and Samuel exchanged glances. It sounded simple, perhaps even naive, but they had worked with Yuki long enough to know that she never said anything without purpose in the Great Chamber. The elder races were already forgetting about the new species that had taken seat 13. Humanity was too young, too weak, too primitive to matter. They would fade away like all the others. But they were wrong, because humanity had spent 30 years doing something the council never expected. They had studied every species. They had learned every culture. They had mapped every alliance and every grudge and every unspoken rule. They knew the galaxy better than most of the species who lived in it, and they had noticed something important. The lesser species, the ones without power, the ones who had been pushed aside and forgotten, they were watching. They were waiting. They were hoping that someday something would change. Humanity intended to be that change, not through war, not through conquest, but through something the elder races had abandoned long ago, connection. YUKI closed her eyes and allowed herself a small smile. The first step was complete. Now the real work would begin. 3 years passed, and the galaxy forgot about humanity. The humans stayed quiet. They followed every rule. They remained in their single system, as the council had ordered. They sent no complaints, made no demands, caused no trouble. The elder races nodded with satisfaction. Another primitive species had learned its place, but humanity was not sleeping. They were building every month. Human ships visited the forgotten corners of the galaxy. They brought medicine to species that the council ignored. They shared technology freely with anyone who asked. They learned languages, studied cultures, and made friends in places where friendship had become rare. Then the Ashkari were an aquatic species. Beings of flowing fins and gentle voices who had once been council members. 2,000 years ago, they had accepted protection from the Velthari to survive a war. Now they were client species, which meant they had no voice, no vote, no rights. Their star was dying. A stellar anomaly had formed near their sun. A wound in space that was slowly cooking their world. The oceans that covered their planet were warming. In 6 months, they would boil. 800 million Ashkari would die. The Velthari Arbiter made an announcement to the council. The Ashkari situation is regrettable, but the cost of evacuation exceeds practical limits. Resources cannot be diverted from more important matters. The other elder races agreed. The Ashkari were not valuable enough to save. Captain Marcus Cole heard the news in his quarters aboard the cargo hauler Endurance. He was a tall man with scars on his hands and gray in his beard. He had spent 20 years moving supplies between human colonies, and his ship showed every year of hard use. The hull was patched in dozens of places. The engine made sounds that worried his engineers. But the Endurance still flew, and Marcus still commanded it. He read the council's decision 3 times. Then he called his crew together. "We are going to save them," he said. His first officer, a woman named Priya Sharma, stared at him. Captain, the Ashkari homeworld is 3 months away. We have 1 ship. There are 800 million of them. Then we will need more ships. Humanity had 17 vessels capable of the journey. The math said this was impossible. You could not evacuate 800 million people with 17 ships in 6 months. The numbers did not work, but humans had never been good at accepting impossible. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka sent out a message to every contact she had made in 3 years. She reminded the Thesari, a declining species that the Council had forgotten, that humans had shared a medical breakthrough with them 5 years ago. She reminded the Mordeath, traitors who were treated as criminals by the elder races, that human stations had always welcomed them fairly. She reminded a dozen other species of small kindnesses, of respect given when no one else would give it. One by one, ships answered the call. The Thesari sent for transport vessels, old but functional. The Mordeath sent 11 cargo haulers that they had hidden from Council taxation. The Varathi, a species so minor that the Council did not even track them, sent to ships and apologized that they could not send more. Within weeks, a fleet of 73 ships gathered at the edge of Ashkari space. It was not enough, but it was a start. The Velthari Arbiter was furious. This violated protocol. The Ashkari were Velthari property, and no one had asked permission to interfere. The Arbiter sent a formal complaint to Seat 13. Ambassador Tanaka received the complaint and smiled. She had been waiting for this moment. She stood before the Council, small and calm among giants. Article 7. Subsection 23 of the original Council. Charter states that any member species may render aid when the responsible party proves unwilling. The Velthari have stated that they will not save the Ashkari. Therefore, we are permitted to act. The Arbiter's liquid form rippled with anger. That law is 60,000 years old. It has never been used, has never been needed before, Yuki replied. The law was valid. The Council could not stop the rescue. Captain Cole led the fleet into Ashkari space. The conditions were worse than anyone expected. The oceans were already dying, fish floating dead on the surface. The Ashkari cities, beautiful structures of coral and living crystal, were crumbling from the heat, but the Ashkari were not waiting to die. They had organized themselves with the efficiency of a species facing extinction. The elderly had volunteered to stay behind so that the young could escape. Parents were giving their children to strangers on transport ships, knowing they might never see them again. Marcus had seen courage before, but this was something else. The evacuation took for months. 73 ships made the journey again and again, carrying as many passengers as they could hold. Human engineers worked around the clock to keep damaged vessels flying. Mordeath traders shared their fuel reserves. The Sari doctors treated the injured and sick. When a Velthari patrol appeared and demanded that the fleet stop, something unexpected happened. A Chthoni warship arrived and positioned itself between the patrol and the refugee transports. The Chthoni were members of the ruling triumvirate. They were not known for mercy, but the warship's captain was young, barely 200 years old by Chthoni standards. He had watched the evacuation from a distance. He had seen species he did not know working together to save people they had never met. And something inside him, something he could not explain, had responded. "This evacuation will continue," the Chthoni captain announced. "Any ship that interferes will answer to me." The Velthari patrol withdrew. On the final day, as the last transport left the dying world, Marcus Cole stood on the bridge of the Endurance and watched the Ashkari homeworld grow smaller in the distance. Its oceans were steaming now, great clouds of vapor rising into the poisoned atmosphere. 800 million Ashkari had been saved. Not all of them, but most. They had been taken to new worlds, places that other species had offered when they saw what humanity was doing. The Varathi gave up one of their own moons. The Thesari shared a continent on their homeworld, and humanity had asked for nothing in return. The Chthoni captain, his name was Calver, sent a private message to Captain Cole before leaving. "I do not understand your species. You had nothing to gain from this. Why did you help?" Marcus thought about the question for a long time before answering. "Because they needed help," he said finally. "And we could give it." Calver did not respond. but he saved the message. He would read it many times in the years to come, in the great chamber of the Galactic Council. The elder races watched these events with growing unease. Humanity had broken no laws. They had not challenged the power structure. They had simply shown the galaxy that another way was possible. The lesser species, the forgotten ones, the ones who had never mattered. They looked at Seat 13 now with different eyes. Not pity hope, the Jorth High. Mine was troubled. It was a collective consciousness. 1 billion individual beings linked into a single vast intelligence. For 20,000 years, it had guided the Jorth species to biological perfection. Every Jorth shared the same thoughts, the same goals, the same carefully designed emotions. There was no conflict among them, no disagreement, no chaos. The Jorth believed they were the most advanced species in the galaxy, and they were afraid of humanity, not afraid of human weapons. Human technology was primitive by Jorth standards, not afraid of human numbers. Humanity was a single species on a handful of worlds. The Jorth were afraid of something they could not name, quality that humans possessed that threatened everything the elder races had built. The Ashkari evacuation had proven it. Species that had never cooperated were now working together. Trade routes were forming outside council control. Ideas were spreading without permission. And always at the center of these changes were humans. The high mind made a decision. Humanity must be contained, but destruction would create martyrs. The galaxy was watching now. Open violence would prove that the elder races feared what humanity represented. So the Jorth chose a different weapon. Words, the whispering war began quietly. A rumor here, a suggestion there. Jorth agents spoke to diplomats at formal gatherings. They shared concerns about humanity's true nature. Had anyone noticed how quickly humans made friends? How easily they earned trust? Was this not suspicious? Humans were predators, the whispers said. They had evolved hunting other creatures. Their history was filled with war and destruction. They had nearly killed their own planet before escaping into space. Could such a species truly be trusted? The whispers spread to the Ashkari refugees first. Some of them began to wonder if humanity had saved them for hidden reasons. Perhaps humans wanted Ashkari labor. Perhaps they wanted Ashkari worlds. Perhaps the rescue had been an investment, not a gift. The Mordyth traders heard the whispers next. They were already paranoid, having been cheated by the elder races for generations. Some of them started to ask if humans were just better at hiding their true intentions. Within a year, humanity's carefully built network of friendships was crumbling. Dr. Amara Osei was humanity's chief cultural liaison. She was a tall woman with kind eyes and a voice that made people want to listen. For 3 years, she had traveled the galaxy, learning how other species thought and felt. She had made more friends than any human before her. Now, those friends would not answer her messages. She presented her findings to Ambassador Tanaka in a secure room on the human station. The Jorth are behind this. They have been planting doubts everywhere we made connections. Our allies are pulling away. Yuki nodded slowly. She had expected something like this. What did they say about us? That we are manipulators. That our kindness is a mask. That we help the Ashkari to control them. Amara's voice was tired. Some of them are starting to believe it. And how do we fight a war of words? Amara had thought about this question for months. Every human instinct said to fight back, to counter the lies with truth, to prove the Jorth wrong. But she knew that would not work. The Jorth had been playing this game for 20,000 years. They were experts at shaping perception. We do not fight, Amara said. We open our doors. The proposal was called radical transparency. Every human colony would become accessible to any species that wanted to visit. Every database would be opened except for true security secrets. Every question would be answered honestly, even the uncomfortable ones. The council laughed when they heard about it. No species had ever been so foolish. Secrets were power. Transparency was weakness. But humanity went ahead anyway. Ships from across the galaxy began arriving at human worlds. Some came to find evidence of human evil. Some came out of curiosity. Some came because they had nothing left to lose. they found something unexpected. Human cities were messy. Human governments argued with each other. Human history was filled with terrible mistakes that humans did not try to hide. In schools, children learned about wars their ancestors had fought. In museums, the darkest moments of human history were preserved and studied. This was not what the visitors expected. The elder races all hid their failures. They presented themselves as perfect, or at least as better than everyone else. Humans seemed to do the opposite. A sorry scholar asked a human historian why they taught their children about ancient atrocities. The historian, an old man named Thomas Wright, thought for a moment before answering. Because we are afraid of becoming that again, he said. If we forget what we were, we might forget why we changed. Our mistakes are not something to hide. They are warnings. The Thesari scholar wrote a paper about this conversation. It spread to other species. The idea was shocking, but also strangely appealing. What would it mean to admit that your species was not perfect? What freedom might come from honesty? Not everyone was convinced. The whispers continued. Some species still distrusted humanity, but others began to see something in the humans that they had never seen in the elder race's authenticity, the Jorith. High Mind watched these developments with growing concern. The campaign should have worked. Fear was reliable. Doubt was powerful. But somehow, humanity was surviving. Worse, some Jorith individuals were asking uncomfortable questions. If humans could admit their flaws and still build a functioning society, what did that mean for the Jorith way? Was the collective consciousness really the best path, or was it simply the safest? The High Mind suppressed these questions. It punished the individuals who asked them. But the questions did not stop. In a small human city on the colony world of New Melbourne, an Ashkari family visited a school. They had been refugees, saved during the evacuation. The parents were still suspicious, still waiting for humans to reveal their true intentions. Their daughter was 7 years old. She found a human girl the same age on the playground. They played together for an hour without knowing each other's language. They communicated through gestures and laughter and the simple joy of running and jumping. When the Ashkari family left, the daughter asked her parents why they were afraid of humans. They do not feel like predators, she said. They feel like friends. Her parents had no answer. Across the galaxy, 1,000 similar moments were happening. The whispers said one thing, but experience said another. The Jorith had underestimated something important about humanity. They had assumed that perception was more powerful than reality. They were wrong. Ambassador Tanaka received reports from every human colony, tracking the visits and conversations and slowly changing attitudes. It would take years to undo the damage the Jorith had caused. Perhaps some species would never trust humanity again, but others would. And those were the ones who mattered. We cannot control what they say about us, Yuki told her staff. We can only control what we do. If we are honest and kind and helpful, eventually the truth will be louder than the lies. It was not a fast strategy. It was not a clever strategy. It was simply a human strategy. And slowly, impossibly, it was working. The Crethoni Dominion was losing patience. For 5 years, they had watched humanity grow stronger, not through weapons or territory, but through something far more dangerous: influence, connection, the slow building of a network that threatened the old order simply by existing. The Crethoni were warriors. They had built their empire through conquest. For 15,000 years they had ruled through strength, and they believed that strength was the only thing that truly mattered. Humanity's rise offended them on a level they could barely express. When 3 human exploration vessels vanished near Crethoni space, no one was surprised. The ships had been mapping a region of dead stars, looking for resources that might help the growing community of species that worked with humanity. They were small vessels with small crews. 47 humans in total. The Crethoni Dominion denied any involvement. But everyone knew the truth. Ambassador Tanaka stood before the council and demanded an investigation. The Velthari Arbiter dismissed her concerns. The Jorith representative suggested that the ships had probably encountered a natural disaster. The Crethoni delegate clicked his mandibles in that laughing rhythm and said nothing. War seemed inevitable. Humanity's allies offered support, but they were small species without military power. Against the Crethoni Dominion, they would be crushed in ours. But Tanaka did not call for war. Instead, she invoked an ancient ritual that had not been used in 40,000 years. The Trial of Grievance. The chamber fell silent. The Trial of Grievance was a relic from the early days of the Council, before the current power structure existed. When two species had an unresolvable dispute, they could settle it through direct confrontation. Not a battle of fleets, but a battle of champions. Mind against mind. Will against will. The ritual was considered barbaric by modern standards. It was also completely legal. The Crethoni delegate rose to his full height, his black shell gleaming under the crystal lights. You challenge us to a trial? You, the weakest species in this chamber? I do, Tanaka said calmly. Unless the Dominion is afraid to face a single human. Every Crethoni in the galaxy heard those words. To refuse would be to admit cowardice, something their entire culture found unacceptable. The delegate's mandibles clicked angrily, but he had no choice. Accept. Our champion will destroy yours. The Crethoni chose Coulter, the Unbroken, the most feared warrior in the Dominion. He was 600 years old and had never lost a battle. His body was covered in ceremonial scars, each one representing an enemy he had defeated. He had killed species that no longer existed. Humanity chose Fleet Admiral James Okonkwo. He was 73 years old. He walked with a slight limp from an injury that had never healed properly. His hair was white, his face was lined with age, and he looked small and fragile compared to the massive Crethoni warrior. But his eyes were steady, and his voice did not shake when he spoke. The trial took place in a special chamber designed for the ritual. Both champions entered a mental arena, a shared space where their thoughts and memories would clash directly. There were no weapons here, no physical strength, no tricks, only truth. Coulter attacked first. He showed his memories of conquest. Worlds burning beneath his ships. Enemies falling before his soldiers. The glory of strength, the purity of victory. For 600 years, he had proven that power determined worth. The weak deserved to fall. The strong deserved to rule. This was the natural order of things. The memories were overwhelming. James felt them crushing against his mind like waves against a small boat. But he did not break. Instead, he showed his own memories. He showed humanity's worst moments. The great wars where millions died, the weapons that could destroy entire cities in a flash of light, the hatred and fear and cruelty that humans had shown each other throughout their history. He did not hide these things. He did not pretend that humanity was innocent. Coulter was confused. This was not how the trial worked. A champion was supposed to show strength, not weakness. Why would this human reveal his species' failures? Then James showed something else. A firefighter entering a burning building to save a stranger. A doctor working through exhaustion to save lives. A soldier throwing himself on an explosive to protect his companions. A mother shielding her child from danger. Small moments. Individual choices. People deciding to help others not because they were strong, but because it was right. He showed humans failing and getting up again. He showed them making terrible mistakes and choosing to do better. He showed a species that had nearly destroyed itself a dozen times, but kept trying, kept hoping, kept reaching for something beyond survival. This is what we are, James said in the shared mental space. We are not strong like you. We are not ancient like you. We break easily and we die quickly. But we do not stop trying. We do not give up on each other. Coulter felt something he had not felt in 400 years. Doubt. He searched his own memories, looking for something to counter what the human had shown him. He found battles and victories and the satisfaction of dominance. But beneath all of that, buried so deep he had forgotten it existed, he found something else, a memory from his youth. A fellow soldier, injured and dying, reaching out for help. Coulter had walked past without stopping. Weakness was death. Mercy was weakness. He had followed the code of his species perfectly, but he remembered the look in that soldier's eyes, the hope that had faded into despair. For 400 years, Coulter had told himself he felt nothing about that moment. He had been lying. The trial ended. Both champions collapsed from exhaustion. Medical teams rushed forward to help them. Coulter the Unbroken lay on the floor of the chamber, staring at the ceiling. He had not lost the trial in any technical sense. Both champions had survived. There was no clear winner, but something had changed inside him. Something had cracked open that he could not close again. 3 days later, the 3 human exploration vessels were returned. All 47 crew members were alive. The Chthoni Dominion claimed they had been rescued from pirates and apologized for the confusion. No one believed this explanation, but no one challenged it either. Something else happened that day. Coulter the Unbroken, the most feared warrior in the Dominion, requested political asylum among humanity. The Chthoni leadership was outraged. They demanded his return. They threatened war if he was not handed over. Ambassador Tanaka responded with a single sentence. Article 12 of the Trial of Grievance. Any participant may choose their own path after the ritual is complete. Another ancient law that no one remembered. Another trap that humanity had prepared decades ago. Coulter was welcomed to a human colony. He lived in a small house near the ocean. He spent his days talking to humans, learning about their strange culture, trying to understand what had happened to him in that mental arena. Other Chthoni heard about this. Some of them were curious. Some of them were angry. Some of them, the young ones, who had grown tired of endless war, began to ask their own questions. Coulter was the first Chthoni to leave the Dominion. He would not be the last in the great chamber of the Galactic Council. The elder races watched these events with growing alarm. Humanity had not won a military victory. They had not conquered any territory. They had done something far more disturbing. They had made a Chthoni warrior choose kindness over strength. And if that could happen, what else might be possible? The old order was not broken, but it had developed cracks. And through those cracks, light was beginning to shine. 50 years had passed since humanity took. Seat 13, the great chamber of the Galactic Council, still stood. Its crystals still glowing, its platforms still floating in their ancient pattern. The Velthari Arbiter still presided over meetings. The elder races still held their positions of power, but everything had changed. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka had retired 30 years ago. She lived on a small planet near the edge of human space, tending a garden and writing her memoirs. Her successors had continued the work she started, but the truth was that humanity no longer needed ambassadors in the traditional sense. The galaxy had learned to talk to itself. Captain Marcus Cole had passed away at the age of 92, surrounded by Ashkari friends who had traveled across the stars to be with him at the end. His ship, the Endurance, had been preserved as a museum. Every year, thousands of beings from dozens of species visited it to see where the great evacuation had been commanded. Dr. Amara Ase had become the most famous cultural translator in known space. Her techniques for building understanding between species were taught in schools on 100 worlds. She was old now, but she still traveled, still learned, still made friends. Fleet Admiral James Okonkwo had died 10 years after the trial of grievance, but his memory lived on. The moment he had shown Coulter the truth about humanity had been recorded and shared. Billions of beings had watched it. Many had wept. Coulter himself was still alive. Chthoni lived for 1,000 years, and he had centuries left. He spent his time teaching young Chthoni who had left the Dominion, helping them understand that strength could mean more than conquest. His students called him the Bridge, because he connected 2 ways of thinking that had never met before. The old triumvirate still controlled the council. The Velthari Jorith and the remains of the Chthoni establishment clung to their positions. They still made laws and issued declarations and pretended that nothing had changed. But power had shifted in ways that could not be measured by seats or votes. Across the galaxy, Species that had never communicated before were now working together. The Ashkari had formed a permanent alliance with their rescuers, a partnership of equals that produced new ideas every year. The Mordeth traders had become the backbone of a new economic network that operated outside council control. The Thessari had found new purpose, sharing their medical knowledge freely with anyone who needed it. Even some Jorith had changed. The High Mind had tried to suppress individual thought for years, but the questions would not stop. Eventually, it had fragmented into 1,000 independent beings who had rediscovered what it meant to think alone. Many of them still formed collectives, but now it was by choice rather than design. In one of its final coherent transmissions before the fragmentation was complete, the High Mind had posed a question to the galaxy. We underestimated you. We saw your short lives and assumed you were insignificant. We saw your internal conflicts and assumed you were primitive. We saw your kindness and assumed it was weakness. What are you? The answer had come from a human child on the colony world of New Melbourne. She was the granddaughter of refugees, the daughter of scientists, and she had spent her whole life in a community where a dozen species lived together. We are what happens when people decide to help each other, she said. We are not special. We are just too stubborn to stop trying. Her words had spread across the galaxy faster than any council decree. The great chamber still stood at the center of the artificial moon, but fewer species bothered to attend its meetings now. The important decisions were being made elsewhere, in thousands of informal networks that had no official standing but accomplished more than the council ever had. A new ambassador represented humanity at Seat 13. Her name was Yuki Chen, named after the woman who had first accepted that position 50 years ago. She was young and idealistic, and sometimes frustrated by how slowly the elder races changed, but she understood what her predecessors had understood. The goal was never to rule the galaxy. It was never to become powerful. It was simply to show that another way was possible. On the anniversary of the Ashkari evacuation, a ceremony was held on the world where the refugees had first landed. Representatives from every species that had participated gathered to remember what had happened. An ancient Ashkari elder spoke first. She had been a child during the evacuation, had watched her homeworld die from the window of a human ship. Now she was the leader of her people. You saved us, she said, looking at the human delegation. But that is not why we remember this day. We remember because you taught us something we had forgotten. We are not alone. None of us are alone. And when we help each other, we become more than we could ever be apart. Similar ceremonies were happening across the galaxy. On Chthoni worlds, where former warriors taught young people to find strength in service. On the Zari stations, where doctors healed anyone who needed help. On Mordeth ships that carried goods without caring about species or politics. And on 1,000 human colonies, where children grew up knowing that the universe was full of friends they had not yet met. The Galactic Council still existed. The elder races still held their seats, but power had moved beyond the Great Chamber, spreading outward like light from a star. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had not overthrown anyone. They had simply kept doing what they had always done. Even when it seemed impossible, they had helped. They had connected, they had cared. And slowly, impossibly, the galaxy had changed. In her garden, on the edge of human space, Yuki Tanaka heard the news of the anniversary ceremony. She was very old now, and her body was failing. But her mind was still sharp. A young Ashkari journalist had traveled to interview her. Ambassador, she asked, when you first took Seat 13, did you believe this was possible? Did you think humanity could really change the galaxy? Yuki thought for a long moment, remembering the Great Chamber. The dismissive looks of the elder races, the small platform that wobbled beneath her feet. I did not know if it was possible, she said finally, but I knew we had to try. That is what humans do. We face impossible things, and we try anyway. Sometimes we fail. Often we fail. But sometimes, if we keep trying long enough, the impossible becomes real. She smiled, looking up at the stars she had spent her life connecting. And that is how humanity rose. Not by being the strongest or the wisest or the oldest, but by being too stubborn to give up on each other, on ourselves, on the idea that kindness matters more than power. The journalist wrote down her words, knowing they would be read by billions. And somewhere in the core of the Galactic Council, in the great chamber that had ruled for 60,000 years, seat 13 sat empty. It was not needed anymore. Because everywhere else, in every corner of the galaxy, humanity had found its true place, not above the others, with them, together.